The air inside the Camp Pendleton mess hall was thick with the smell of powdered eggs, burnt coffee, and sweat that had dried into the camouflage fabric of 1,000 uniforms. It was 05 for 5, the hour when the world belonged to the grunts, the infantrymen who had already run 5 miles, done pull-ups until their hands bled, and now stood in line with trays, grumbling about the rubbery omelets. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sickly green glow. Voices bounced off the cinder block walls, a constant low roar of jokes, complaints, and the unique bravado that only young Marines carried. In the far corner, near the emergency exit that no one ever used, a woman sat alone. She was not large by any measure, maybe 5 feet 6 inches, lean as a fence post, with shoulders that hinted at years of swimming against currents most people would never see. Her hair was pulled back in a tight, regulation bun, and her Navy working uniform was crisp, the trident insignia of the SEALs conspicuously absent. To anyone looking, she was just another sailor, maybe a corpsman or a supply officer, passing through on temporary duty. Her name was Senior Chief Petty Officer Elena Vasquez, and she had completed 3 deployments to Afghanistan, 2 to Iraq, and 1 classified mission in the Horn of Africa that involved a submarine, a rubber boat, and a target who never saw the shadow falling over him. But here, in this mess hall filled with 200 Marines from the 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, she was invisible. That was exactly how she wanted it. She had learned long ago that the best way to move through the world was to let people underestimate her. Let them see a woman eating breakfast alone. Let them assume she was lost, or scared, or just another administrative paper pusher waiting for a ride to San Diego. She lifted a spoonful of oatmeal to her lips, chewing methodically. The oatmeal was terrible, lumpy and cold in the middle, but she had eaten worse. Much worse. She remembered a night in the mountains of Kunar province, eating cold MRE cheese spread with a broken plastic spoon while Taliban fighters searched the valley below. Compared to that, cold oatmeal was a luxury. The trouble started at 06:02, when Lance Corporal Marcus Webb and his 2 friends, Privates First Class Tyler Dunn and Jason Moros, lit into the bench across from her. They were young, maybe 19 or 20, with the kind of faces that had not yet learned to hide what they were thinking. Webb was the biggest, a former high school linebacker from Texas, with a shaved head and a neck as thick as a fire hydrant. Dunn was wiry and twitchy, the kind of kid who laughed aloud at his own jokes. Morrow was quiet, but his eyes moved constantly, assessing. Like a stray dog deciding whether to fight or run. "Hey, shipmate," Webb said. Using the term the way a cat might say mouse, his voice was loud, meant to carry. "You lost. The Navy's that way." He jerked his thumb toward the door, grinning. Elena did not look up from her oatmeal. "I know where the Navy is, thanks," Dunn snorted. "She talks." He leaned forward, elbows on the table, invading her space. "What's a sailor doing in the middle of a Marine camp anyway? You delivering mail? Need someone to help you read the addresses?" A few nearby tables chuckled. Webb's grin widened. This was entertainment for them, a way to break the monotony of training, to assert their place in the pecking order. Marines were the tip of the spear, they believed. Sailors drove the boats and handed out aspirin. There was a natural order to things, and seeing a woman in a Navy uniform, sitting alone in their mess hall, was like finding a penguin in the desert. Elena finished her oatmeal. She set the spoon down carefully, aligned with the edge of the bowl, and finally looked up. Her eyes were dark brown, calm, and completely unreadable. "I'm just passing through," she said. "Waiting for a transport." "A transport?" Webb laughed. "Where you headed, shipmate?" "Back to the fleet. They got a big boat show in Long Beach you're late for." Morrow, the quiet one, finally spoke. "Maybe she's a SEAL," he said it as a joke, but something in his voice was uncertain. He had noticed the way she sat, not slouched like most sailors, but upright, balanced, her weight evenly distributed, her hands never far from her center of mass. It was the posture of someone who had spent a lot of time in places where sitting casually could get you killed. The table went quiet for half a second. Then Webb exploded with laughter. "A SEAL, her. Come on, Morrow. You been sniffing jet fuel again?" He pointed at Elena, his finger inches from her face. "Look at her. She's what, 140 soaking wet. A SEAL has to carry a 200-pound pack for 20 miles. She couldn't carry a beach umbrella that far." Elena did not flinch. She did not blink. She had been called worse by better men. In Bud's training, basic underwater demolition, SEAL school, the instructors had screamed things in her face that would have made Webb's jokes sound like nursery rhymes. She had endured Hell Week with pneumonia, dragged a rubber boat through the surf for 5 days straight while her lungs burned like they were filled with broken glass, and completed the infamous drown-proofing test with a fractured rib. A 19-year-old Marine with a bad attitude was not going to ruin her breakfast. "I think you should move your finger," she said quietly. Webb did not move his finger. "Or what? You gotta write me up. Call your chief." "Go ahead, shipmate." "I'm shaking." He wiggled his finger in her face, pretending to tremble. Dunn was laughing so hard he had to put down his coffee. Other Marines were turning to watch now, the mess hall's attention slowly focusing on the corner table like a magnifying glass concentrating sunlight. Some were smiling, enjoying the show. Others looked uncomfortable, sensing that something was off, but not sure what. Morrow, the quiet one, was not laughing. He was staring at Elena's hands. They were resting on the table now, palms down, fingers slightly spread. The knuckles were thick and scarred, the nails short and clean. These were not the hands of someone who spent her days filing paperwork. These were the hands of someone who had climbed rock faces at night, who had twisted knife handles in close quarters, who had pulled drowning men from the water and shoved enemy fighters off boats and done 100 other things that left permanent marks on the body. "Webb," Morrow said, his voice low. "Maybe we should go." "Shut up, Morrow." Webb was enjoying himself too much to stop now. He leaned closer to Elena, his face aggressive now instead of teasing. "I'll tell you what, sailor. You don't belong here. This is a Marine mess hall. Real warriors eat here. So why don't you take your little tray and your little oatmeal and go find the ladies' lounge or whatever it is you do?" The mess hall had gone mostly quiet now. Even the kitchen staff had stopped clattering pots to listen. A senior Marine sergeant at the next table over was watching with narrowed eyes, trying to decide whether to intervene. But he was curious too. He had never seen a sailor sit so still under pressure. Elena Vasquez had been in situations where silence meant the difference between life and death. She had hidden in a drainage ditch for 6 hours while a patrol walked past, so close she could smell the cigarette smoke on their breath. She had learned to make her heart slow down, to control her breathing, until she was almost invisible to the world. Right now, in this mess hall, her heart rate was 62 beats per minute. She was not angry. She was not scared. She was simply waiting. "I'll ask you one more time," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but somehow carrying to every corner of the room. "Move your finger, or what?" Webb repeated, but this time his voice cracked slightly. He had expected her to cry, or to get up and leave, or to go find a superior officer to complain. He had not expected this eerie calm, this complete lack of fear. For the first time, he noticed that her eyes were not the eyes of a victim. They were the eyes of a predator deciding whether the prey was worth the effort. Morrow stood up abruptly. "I'm out." "Dunn, let's go." Dunn hesitated, torn between loyalty to Webb and the sudden, primal instinct that told him to put distance between himself and the woman in the Navy uniform. He looked at Webb, then at Elena, then back at Webb. "Maybe he's right, man. This isn't a you're both pathetic." Webb pushed himself up from the bench, looming over Elena now. He was a foot taller and 100 pounds heavier, and he was using every inch of it to intimidate. "You know what, sailor? You're finished. Do you hear me? You come into our mess hall, you disrespect us, you think you can just sit there like you belong. You're done. When I'm done with you, they'll have to scrape you off the floor." He reached down and grabbed her tray, intending to dump the remains of her oatmeal into her lap. It was a classic bully move, humiliation through mess. The kind of thing that got laughs from the crowd and left the victim scrambling for dignity. But Elena Vasquez had not survived by letting people dump things in her lap. Her hand moved faster than Webb's eyes could track. She caught his wrist mid-grab, her fingers wrapping around the bone like a set of steel cable ties. The pressure was immediate and precise, not squeezing hard enough to break anything, but hitting exactly the right nerve cluster to turn his hand into a claw. Webb's fingers opened involuntarily, and the tray clattered back onto the table, oatmeal splashing harmlessly onto the plastic surface. The mess hall erupted, not in laughter this time, but in shouts. "Hey, what's going on over there? Someone get the duty officer." Chairs scraped back as Marine stood up to see better. The senior sergeant was on his feet now, moving toward the table, his face dark with concern, but before he could take 3 steps, Elena moved again. She released Webb's wrist not because she had to, but because she wanted to, and stood up. In the same fluid motion, she reached into the collar of her uniform and pulled out a chain that had been hidden beneath her shirt. On the chain were two things: a set of dog tags and a small gold trident. She let the trident fall against her chest, where it caught the fluorescent light and flashed like a signal flare. The mess hall went silent. Not the kind of silent where people whisper, the kind of silent where no one breathes. Every Marine in that room knew what that trident meant. It was the insignia of the United States Navy SEALs, one of the most difficult and respected badges in the entire military. There were less than 3,000 active duty SEALs at any given time, and only a handful of them were women. The first female SEAL had graduated just a few years ago, and the rumors about her had spread through the fleet like wildfire. The woman who had finished Hell Week with a stress fracture, who had outswum every man in her class, who had gone on to lead multiple combat missions and been recommended for a Bronze Star. You were saying? Elena asked, her voice still quiet, still calm. She looked at Webb, who had turned the color of old cheese. His mouth was open, but no sound came out. His friends had backed away, Dunn nearly tripping over a bench, Morrow simply shaking his head as if to say, "I told you so." The senior sergeant arrived at the table, breathing hard from his quick walk. He looked at the trident, looked at Elena's face, and snapped to attention so fast his back cracked. "Senior Chief, I apologize. These men will be at ease, Sergeant." Elena held up a hand, and the sergeant froze. She turned back to Webb, who was standing there like a man who had just realized he was standing on train tracks with a locomotive bearing down on him. "Lance Corporal, what's your name?" "Webb, Senior Chief. Lance Corporal Marcus Webb." His voice was a whisper. "Webb," she said his name like she was tasting it, then nodded slowly. "You've got good instincts. You tried to defend your mess hall, your unit's space. That's not a bad thing. But you need to learn that not everyone who looks different is weak. The enemy you underestimate is the enemy who kills you. You understand?" Webb nodded, his eyes fixed on the trident. He looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and never come out. "I'm not going to report this," Elena continued, and the relief that washed over Webb's face was almost painful to see. "But I want you to remember this morning. Remember how you felt when you saw that trident. Because out there, in the real fight, you might run into someone who doesn't look like a threat. A woman in a market, a kid selling tea, an old man with a limp. And if you dismiss them the way you dismissed me, you won't live long enough to regret it." She gathered her tray, stacked her bowl and spoon neatly, and turned to leave. The mess hall parted for her like the Red Sea, Marines stepping aside, some of them saluting, others simply staring. At the door, she paused and looked back at Webb, who was still standing frozen by the table. "By the way," she said, "I'm not passing through. I'm here to evaluate your battalion's waterborne insertion training. I'll be on the beach at 05:00 tomorrow. Don't be late." She walked out, and the mess hall remained silent for a full 10 seconds before someone let out a long, shaky breath, and the noise slowly returned, quieter now, more subdued. Like a party after someone has mentioned a death in the family. Webb sat down heavily on the bench, his legs refusing to hold him anymore. Dunn and Morrow sat across from him, neither one speaking. Finally, Morrow broke the silence. "I told you she was a SEAL." Webb put his head in his hands. "I called a Navy SEAL shipmate. I'm never going to live this down." "Probably not," Morrow agreed. "But at least you're alive." Outside, Elena Vasquez walked across the sun-baked parade ground toward the officers' quarters, her boots crunching on the gravel. The morning was warming up now, the California sun beginning to burn through the marine layer. She allowed herself a small smile, not because she had humiliated a young Marine, but because she had given him a lesson that might save his life someday. She had meant what she said about the enemy. But she had also meant something else, something she did not say out loud. She had meant that strength is not about size or gender or the uniform you wear. Strength is about what you carry inside you when no one is watching. It is about the cold nights and the long swims and the moments when you think you cannot take another step. And then you take it anyway. She touched the trident at her chest, feeling the cool metal against her fingers. Then she tucked it back beneath her shirt, out of sight, and continued walking. There would be other mess halls, other young Marines, other moments when she would have to decide whether to show her hand or stay hidden. But for now, she was just a sailor eating breakfast. And that was exactly how she wanted it. The next morning at 05:50, Lance Corporal Marcus Webb stood on the beach in full combat gear, shivering in the pre-dawn cold. The Pacific Ocean stretched out before him, dark and endless, the waves crashing against the sand with a rhythm that felt almost menacing. He had not slept well every time he closed his eyes. He saw that gold trident flashing in the fluorescent light, heard that quiet voice saying, "Move your finger." Dunn and Morrow were with him, along with the rest of their squad. No one was talking much. Word had spread through the battalion last night. The Navy SEAL was here. She was real, and she was going to run them through waterborne insertion drills. The rumors had grown in the telling. Some said she had killed 20 men with her bare hands. Others said she had swum from Alcatraz to San Francisco in handcuffs. A few of the more imaginative privates claimed she could hold her breath for 7 minutes. Webb did not know what to believe anymore. All he knew was that he had made the biggest mistake of his short military career, and now he had to face the consequences. The sun began to paint the horizon in shades of pink and orange, and then he saw her. Elena Vasquez walked down the beach like she owned it, wearing a black wetsuit, unzipped to the waist, her trident on a chain around her neck, her face expressionless. She was carrying a coil of rope and a waterproof map case, and she moved with the easy grace of someone who had spent more time in the water than on land. "Good morning, Marines," she said, stopping in front of the assembled squad. Her voice carried easily over the sound of the waves. "Today, we're going to practice nighttime beach landings from rubber raiding craft. You'll paddle out to miles, navigate back using only a compass and the stars, and land on this beach without being detected by the opfer I've stationed on the bluffs." She looked at Webb, and for a moment, he thought he saw something like approval in her eyes. Not warmth, exactly, but acknowledgement. He had shown up. He had not quit. That counted for something. "Lance Corporal Webb," she said. "You'll be the boat team leader. Get your men in the water." Webb swallowed hard, then nodded. "Yes, Senior Chief." He turned to his squad and began barking orders, his voice louder than he felt. The men moved to the rubber boats, lifting them onto their shoulders, wading into the cold water. The waves crashed against their legs, soaking them instantly, but no one complained. They were too focused, too aware that they were being watched by someone who had earned the right to judge them. Elena watched from the shoreline as the boats pushed off into the darkness. She did not get into a boat herself. Instead, she began to jog along the beach, paralleling their course, her eyes never leaving the small specks bobbing in the water. She had done this 1,000 times, watched young men and women push themselves beyond what they thought possible, watched them fail and succeed and fail again. It was her job to find the ones who would survive, the ones who had that fire inside them that no amount of cold water could extinguish. Webb paddled hard, his arms burning, the rope handles digging into his palms. The boat was heavier than it looked, the current stronger than he had expected. Behind him, Dunn was cursing under his breath, and Morrow had gone completely silent, conserving his energy. The bluffs loomed on their left, dark shapes against the fading stars. And Webb knew that somewhere up there, Opfer was watching through night vision goggles, waiting to kill them if they made a sound, left or. "Easy," he whispered, steering the boat away from a submerged rock. His heart was pounding, not from fear, but from something else, something that felt almost like excitement. He had never done this before, never led a team in the dark with real stakes on the line. But here he was, and the woman who could have destroyed him yesterday was trusting him to get it right. They paddled for what felt like hours. The beach disappeared behind them, then reappeared as a thin line of lighter darkness. Webb checked the compass strapped to his wrist, adjusted their heading, and kept going. His muscles screamed. His lungs burned. But he did not stop. When they finally beached the boat silently, perfectly, the rubber bottom scraping against sand, without a sound, Webb let out a breath he did not know he had been holding.